Good day and welcome, America and beyond. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Patriotism and action, putting America first, New World Order dead last. Well, the election is over. I almost said final, but the electors still have to, well, that's kind of technical, and I'm not so sure you really want to hear about that. Although this audience probably would. But they're not going to change the results. There's no electors that are going to vote against the will and the votes of the people. But nevertheless, let's just look at what's happened here. With the exception of Jerry Doyle in mainstream traditional radio, I'm unaware of anybody that saw this Obama freight train or avalanche coming. Now, what really amazes me, and again, I'm not here to get all the kudos. I did put myself out there on the day of the election, prior to the election, taping another podcast or doing a stream broadcast where I said, absolutely, positively, I am forecasting, I am predicting that Obama would win in the range of 3 to 5%. Although that percentage points and all that, depending on electors and states, and that's not a big deal. But the real fact of the matter is that, with the exception of, I think, one swing state, Obama, it's been a clean sweep. I think Florida is still somewhat, because of its, well, Obama's ahead by 1%. I think it's 50-49. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. But in all likelihood, based on where the vote count is still being tabulated, it is in South Florida. And it is in that Palm Beach County and those areas. So Obama's going to take Florida. And I cannot believe, although maybe I should, that the Fox Follies, they're a strategist, they're experts and analysts, or they call them Fox News expert contributors, whatever it is. And the one we're going to talk about here for a moment is Turd Blossom. That was the nickname that Bush and Cheney gave to Bush's brain, the architect, Karl Rove. But how could Karl Rove be on Fox News and chiding them because of the forecast models? And rarely have we found that when they declare a winner, that they have to go back and it's happened a couple times. And maybe they learn their lessons, these major networks, that they will not, and also the mathematics or the statistical analysis is so far advanced in terms of how they do this. But he said that, well, wait a minute, they're still counting the votes in Ohio. Well, yeah, they were. And he was still hanging hope on certain counties. And as I alluded to, he started to chide. He started to criticize Fox for making that announcement, which he felt was far premature, and that he still stated that Romney would win Ohio. Then you have the toe sucker, and he's a sucker, believe me, and a suck up. And that's Dick Morris, the former Democrat, and almost, in some ways, not quite Clinton's brain, because Clinton actually had a brain, but he really was his alter ego, and someone that he used as that strategist, and someone that gave him a lot of media advice and analysis. But let's just say that regardless of what his background is, or his loyalties or disloyalties, this guy said it would be an absolute landslide. And he was still predicting it late into the evening. What are they smoking or drinking? Why couldn't... These are the guys that have been involved in big-time campaigns. They know how it works. And then I go beyond the Fox Follies and their pundits and their guest contributors and experts and analysts, and let's look at the talk show host. I don't hardly listen to them in the mainstream, but Limbaugh, Hannity, Beck, Ingram, and you can go down the list. All the Salem people, the majority of the Cumulus people, the Clear Channel Premier Radio Network, Spain Capital people, and others, the TRN people, with the exception of Jerry Doyle. And they all said that Romney was going to win, but not just win, but win big. And I have to, again, remind you, and some of you are first-time listeners to this stream or to the 24/7 channel or to the podcast more directly and specifically, and you may say, well, I don't know what you predicted. Well, I changed my prediction, not my position. And again, I'm going to point precisely to the rationale. Was even though I said Romney would be the nominee, and perhaps, well, not just perhaps, but I thought up until the Democrat National Convention, I thought that Romney had been selected. But I didn't realize at some point he was rejected by the established order. But I started to see more and more of this come into focus. But when they brought Clinton out to be the closer, and really that's when the closing arguments were made. You could say the debates played a role. You could say that Hurricane Sandy. But if Clinton had not so enthusiastically and completely endorsed Obama and the Obama record, I don't think that Obama... Well, no, See, this is a stream of consciousness, so I'm kind of thinking through some of this. I don't go from a prepared script. My ideas and my thoughts and what I express here is a flow. It's stuff that's coming from my internal instincts and intuition and gut feeling and intellect and impressions. So the stream of consciousness. Let me just carry on. And I've mentioned this in prior broadcasts, that I truly believe it was Clinton that was the closer, and probably deserves more credit than anybody for putting Obama over the top. Yes, Romney made a lot of mistakes. Now, were they intentional? Were they by design? I think that John McCain was an absolute fall guy. I think they gave Romney an opportunity to prove himself. When I say they, I'm talking about the puppet masters, the puppeteers. And I think he had an opportunity to prove that he was the candidate not just for creating jobs or the economy or business or monetary or financial or Wall Street, but that he could also manage foreign affairs, and that he could make good decisions, and he's someone they could count on. And I think they found him to be somewhat risky and unreliable for someone that generally... And quite frankly, I don't think they understood who he was. Now, Nixon, in office, he started going, well, kind of nuts. And he was a loose cannon and became unpredictable, and they decided to Watergate him. They had to get rid of him. But Romney, it's like, which Romney are we talking about? Severe, moderate, liberal, or somewhere in between? And so I think that they decided that we know what Obama's about. And quite frankly, Obama is being given license to be essentially an avowed communist. And you could say naked, you could say overt. He doesn't even have to hide it. And they also have been able to use him in even... Well, some would say, well, he helped with the wind down and the ending of the Iraq War, which even Bush's finally came to the realization it was time to pull out and let Bechtel go in and rebuild. But let's get off Iraq. And then I think that they showed that this guy could be strong in their foreign policy exploits and adventures, and and get away with it without massive protest. Where are all the bleeding hearts? Where are all the peaceniks and anti-warmongers? They hardly exist. A little bit of... you know what? I was just thinking about that. The whole protest from the I can't remember the name of the movement. These movements, they come and go, like Perot's reform movement. But the anti-Wall Street, the anti... I don't know why I can't remember, but I'll get back to it. But then you had the Tea Party that almost every candidate ran from. They put a separation between themselves, and any time that the Tea Party moniker came up, they said, "Oh no, we're Republicans." They completely dished. They completely distanced themselves. That wall separation was there. Now, if Romney was, again, I'm kind of conflicted here. Was he really running? I mean, did he really want to be the president? I think there, at least it seemed to me, although I'm not an insider, that he really wanted this. But I don't know. At some point, it was almost like he would sabotage himself. At some point, it was almost as though there were all kinds of missteps. And how could you not know that in the modern age of technology that, and also how could you trust everybody in a room when you're using comments like the 47%? And he had a lot of slips on the campaign trail. You know, corporations are people, and I like to fire people, and you know, he couldn't get away from that. That Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, you know, upper crust, you know, super richy rich kind of guy. Now, Obama is not super rich, and yes, he can be aloof and somewhat detached, but people still, they kind of like him. Many people do, you know, and they, you know, what can I tell you? This was a very peculiar race because you could see McCain wasn't even trying, where Romney was. But I think they came to realize that even though he was selected, they eventually, in all due reality, he was rejected by the established order. And I told you that Governor Christie was out for himself, and that when there was hardly a mention, maybe a mere mention, of the candidate during his speech, that this guy was going to run in 2016, and then he just said, you know what, I already realized that Romney's not going to win, and, you know, I'm going to ingratiate myself with the president. I'm going to show that I'm really the bipartisan, you know, kind of guy that can reach across the aisle, and that his likabilities will be up. See, that's the problem, was Romney was not a likable person or candidate. Now, they might like him in his church, in his family, in his neighborhood, but you know that Romney could not win his home state of Massachusetts, could not win the neighboring state of New Hampshire, all places that he has a home. You know, he's got some kind of residence, at least part of the year. There's other places too, but how about Michigan? And wanting to let the auto industry go bankrupt, and some of the callous remarks that he made about that, and the fact is he had some lunatics that were involved with him, you know, that didn't help matters either. But I'm not going to get into all the side, you know, the sidewinders or the offbeat trails. But Romney was not real. Romney was more robotic. And Romney never revealed any plan that was discernible and that you could pin. He never liked to be pinned down in terms of his personality, his positions. And furthermore, he did not reach out to the Tea Partiers. And what about the Ron Paul people? There was no outreach. If you say that Rand Paul was the outreach, wrong answer. That's not an outreach to the Tea Partiers. So there was a disconnect. And there was a divide between whoever Romney saw as his base and those that would potentially vote for him, and the Ron Paul Liberty people. And then even Gary Johnson got shunned, of course, and Gary Johnson went off and became the Libertarian candidate for president. Now, there are some in the alternative media that are making claims that are not quite true. But then again, they blame every weather catastrophe or disaster on HAARP. But let's get away from HAARP. We'll get to that another day. Let's talk about the fact is that the independent parties hold in 2%. Well, you have to remember, not all the vote has been tabulated throughout the United States. And if you're looking at the percentage of the popular vote, you can't assume that because of where I think it's 50-48 or whatever it might be, that the other 2%, some of that's not counted. I think what you're going to find is it's going to be closer to about 1% is what all the third-party candidates got combined. There just wasn't enough excitement and enthusiasm for this crop of third-party candidates. And I don't mean any disrespect, but Ralph Nader, he was a superstar for the Green Party, and he had name recognition. Gary Johnson had limited name recognition as opposed to someone like, say, Ron Paul. Although Ron Paul, back in 1988, and again, I think these statistics are somewhat skewed. Skewed meaning I don't believe them to be entirely accurate. And I think a lot of libertarian votes in many precincts are either discounted or just totally have been rejected and sometimes just lost in space. So I think the percentage was a little bit more than 0.5%. So 0.5 was not a great showing. But then again, Ron Paul didn't have as much name recognition outside of the Patriot Freedom Constitutional Movement at that time. So, but Ralph Nader, I think he ended up with almost close to 3%. And of course, Perot closer to almost 20%. So third-party candidates, unless they have high visibility, great name recognition, fully funded, and also there's dissension in the ranks. Now, if Ron Paul had run as an independent, he would have chipped away at a greater percentage. And that, of course, would have taken even more away from Romney. But if Romney somehow, some way, could have reached out to the Tea Partiers and to the independents that were more connected and affiliated with Ron Paul, he might have had a shot. Matter of fact, quite frankly, he could have won. But he didn't do that. And going with Paul Ryan, that was not a winning formula. Ryan couldn't deliver Wisconsin. Now, this is not just a Republican deal. I mean, John Kerry, his running mate, John Edwards, he was unable to deliver his home state of North Carolina. Al Gore couldn't deliver Tennessee for Clinton. And Al Gore couldn't pick up Arkansas. That was Clinton's state when he ran. Not completely unusual. But they're saying now, maybe Romney, if he could have gone with Rubio, that could have delivered Florida. I would have to agree. Although it still wouldn't have given Romney enough electoral college votes to put him over the top, but that would have brought him closer. And maybe Rubio would have excited more Hispanics, and maybe there could have been some more successes. But I think that where this nation is, being so divided, and quite frankly, they really continue to blame Bush and Cheney, rightfully so, for so much of the damage that was created by them. And that with Clinton, surging in popularity, and the fact of the matter is, whether you look at Clinton's policies or just the free market system or Republicans and their work in conjunction with him, there was this economic revival, if you will, and there was some good news as it relates to job creation and unemployment rate and those kind of things. So anyway, I'm really happy that the election is over. And so we have an avowed communist versus a corporate socialist, fascist, Mr. Moderate Mitt. Okay, so either way, we're going to go down the wrong path. And the Republican Party is completely, devastated. I mean, they are completely annihilated. They're more or less out of the game.